Welcome to the EXCELcast. I'm Mark Clegg, Director of Entrepreneurship and Career Services at the University of Michigan School of Music, Theater, and Dance. I'm here with Daniel Roumain, DBR.
Yeah, man.
Graduate of the University of Michigan, and violinist, but also you graduated in composition, right?
I did, that's my degree, yeah. DMA in music composition. Yeah.
And what did you do? Did you go to New York immediately after graduating?
I did. I remember I left the day before January 1st, the day before New Year of 1998. I was at Willow Tree Apartments, throwing stuff in the dumpster, putting stuff into a U-Haul truck, fueled that night. A good friend of mine, Holly, and I, we left just before midnight and drove straight through the snow, right into Harlem.
And when was your first performance in New York? Because it's our dance accompaniment, as I remember.
Yeah,
right?
I had been performing there as a master's student here several times. My first performance there as a Harlemite, as a New York City resident, was actually that month at a program called MATA, Music at the Anthology. Two former proteges of Philip Glass started that Young Composers Program. And it was literally Music at the Anthology Archives, MATA, which it's still on 2nd Avenue and 1st Street in New York City.
That's great. Yeah. Well, this is what I want to talk to you about today, is sort of the art of collaboration, if you will.
Nice.
Making connections, using a network, making things happen, which is sort of how we're defining entrepreneurship here. But do you think of, when you're trying to put a program together, do you think of the artistic vision, or do you think of the people that you want to work with first? What comes first, the partnership or the people?
The idea, usually the idea. And I remember her name now, Lisa Bilawa. Wonderful vocalist and composer. She was and still is in the Philip Glass Ensemble.
Yeah.
A really incredible artist, has many ideas, really executes, and that's the point. I think that for me, for Mr. Glass, for Lisa, for other people, you start with the idea, and then you figure out a way to rally supporters. You come up with a plan, you fund it, you do it. Yeah.
So let's go through those very things. So how do you get your ideas?
Oh, I have too many ideas. I think Björk was saying, a wonderful Icelandic singer and composer, she was saying, I got about 50 more years of life and about 50,000 ideas or something like that. And it's true. Hopefully you have too many ideas for a lifetime. Bill T. Jones, the great dancer choreographer, he always talks about taking the mundane and turning it into magic. So oftentimes ideas come from family, issues of the day, topical issues or stories.
Like your symphony with your son, and just
the symphony with my son, meditations on raising boys. Sometimes they're pulled from the headlines. Sometimes they're very personal. I lost my father a few years ago, so I'm thinking about, pieces about mourning and a requiem and things like that. This has always been the case. So the ideas are kind of all around us. If anything, I think for most people you have to choose. And if you don't have ideas, then I think you just maybe have to get out into the world a little bit, right? And see what's online, see what's in the newspaper, see what's in your heart. So I think for most of us, settling on one idea is an important part of the process. In some ways, maybe the hardest part. It is for me.
Do you have any guidelines of how you know this is a winner idea?
Yeah, I call it kind of practical imagination. I would love to write a piece for 3 orchestras and 2 helicopters, my version of Greppen or something, right? Yeah, exactly. Stockhausen. Probably pretty hard to convince people to do that, organizations to do that. So you winnow it down. Maybe it's 3 people and
only 1 helicopter.
Yeah, or what are they? Not drones. Right? That'd be very topical. There we go, right? So yeah, maybe 3 musicians, 2 drones. Actually,
I think we got
that's kind of a cool idea. I love the notion of, wow. We are recording this, right?
Exactly. Pick up mics on the drone.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you have to cover it. You have to keep your ideas secret. But I love the notion. Well, actually, what we were just doing is what I would call modeling. For whatever reasons, I think in classical music we get stuck into this notion of everything has to be original. It's a commission, therefore, that's really not how things are done. I think having a model for an idea is great. I just mentioned Stockhausen's Greppen. I mean, that is a kind of fantastic thing. Some of his works come from dreams, and he realizes them. But to take the concept of that piece, 3 different instrumental ensembles operating with 3 different conductors. That is something you can winnow down to what I call a kind of a practical imagination. And by that I mean you have to determine your time, your resources, where you are, who's involved, how much money and funding you can have for it, and make that dream, your imagination, if you will, into a kind of a practical reality. So you're always editing, and that leads us, I would say, to the blurb. The blurb.
So is the blurb, is that how you do the second thing? You rally the troops. I mean, how do you?
Yeah, well, that's part of it. I think the way to rally the troops, the way, you know, I always say this, and ideas are great, but, you know, until you write it down, it almost doesn't exist, right? So the blurb is a kind of a in-the-field industry catchism for the description of the piece. Usually a paragraph long, that's always good, right?
Got to be tight.
Really tight, and this is what the piece is. And oftentimes grants, you know, even if you're going to share it with somebody else, you know, oftentimes when I'm expressing my idea to my business manager or business partner or whoever's involved, potential collaborators, I got to tell them something. So the blurb usually comes pretty quick. And actually, writing the blurb, I find, not only crystallizes the project, but it helps to define it in the best sense. Because you're forced to actually say, this piece is going to be for string quartet and 4 laptops and 2 drones and whatever it is. And it's going to be, you know, this long. You know, one of the things that built that, one of the things that John Corigliano would have his students do would be to write out their compositions in prose, literally. The house lights go down, the concert master and mistress comes out, the conductor comes out, and the flute does, and then the strings do. And I started doing that, you know, even before I was writing blurbs. I started writing my pieces out in prose. It's very helpful. And then you would take that prose score and actually create a notated score, right, traditional score. So I think that for a project, and that's what we're talking about, I think it's really, really important to write down what it is you intend to do. It's going to force you to put the finger or stylus or whatever it is to your paper, to your digital laptop, whatever it is, and it's going to force you to create that document that, in the best sense, will guide you through the entire, from concept to production of the piece.
So how much of your blurb is actually not just about the what you're going to do, but the why you're going to do it, like the bigger social purpose?
Actually, I hadn't always thought about that. Well, for me, the blurb is almost always something that's kind of practical. The why, the morals of it, I don't know if I always write down in the blurb. That may end up in the program notes. That may end up somewhere where I am a grant, or you're making an appeal. That's called an appeal. An
So
appeal
that's
for
an
funding.
important part of rallying the troops and rallying
Yes.
the financial support you would need.
Exactly, exactly. You know, I just had performed a very large piece for a large symphony orchestra, a narrative chorus of men and boys, spoken word artist, solo violin, called Meditations on Raising Boys. So that's an example where you're given an opportunity, you're given a commission. Now you have to decide, is it Symphony No. 1? Is it Obama's portrait, right? In conjunction with maybe Lincoln portrait, who knows? Or is it Meditation on Raising Boys? A response to Obama's kind of notion of what does it mean to be a young African-American man in this country.
Yeah, the Promise Keepers. And
Exactly, all of that, exactly. So I decided to write this type of a piece, a narrative chorus, a chorus that doesn't sing, but they speak. The great Mark Bamuti Joseph as a spoken word artist and librettist, the Chautauqua Symphony Orchestra. And in writing that blurb down, there was a big moral stake for me as a father to a 6-year-old mixed race son, and also thinking about what I was calling at that point, I still think it's true, this crisis of young men worldwide. You know, from ISIS to what's happening on our college campuses, sometimes it always inevitably involves young men who have been led astray, right? How long that's been going on for, who knows? But I do think there's a crisis happening. I feel strongly that way. So as a composer, what was my response going to be? So to answer your question, that was something where my kind of, almost a moral opportunity came up. Here's a commission in a kind of, by the way, a very kind of fancy, the word for that is a bourgeoisie, part of the country, right? Chautauqua, New York. very sophisticated audience at the same time, not particularly diverse. And I knew that. It's a big deal to have a black violinist, a black spoken word artist, and what I insisted would be a diverse chorus of men and boys, pulling from the boys club, the local boys club in Chautauqua, just outside the city of Chautauqua. All of these things to say that that was a piece that was driven first by a sense of morality, a sense of, as a composer, what is my response going to be to what I'm declaring as a crisis of young men in this country.
Right. But also universal, because
I think so.
all cultures have sons.
Yeah, yes, they do. Lest we forget. Yes,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're so lucky to get a commission, the sort of financial piece is maybe in the equation from the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely.
To a certain extent.
Yeah.
What about if it's not? I mean, have you had projects where you have the project and it's really coming from you and you're producing it, and you've got to find a way to make the money work? What sort of tools do you use to get that?
Well, that's how my whole career. Yeah, that's how my whole career started. I think my first investor in my works was me. You know, I mean, I started writing pieces for myself. Then I started writing pieces for my friends. The only thing I asked is that they actually played it. They didn't have to pay me. The payment was having it come to life.
Right.
That was happening at Vanderbilt University. That was happening right across the street here, University of Michigan. So I was my first investor, really. And then I started, when I moved to New York City, of course, there are opportunities for small grants. American Music Center, BMI, ASCAP. There's all sorts of fundings from, a variety of places. And I started applying. I won a few. Most of the ones, though, I didn't get anything. But, you get your name out there, you get your reputation out there. And I think that one of the first projects I started was a piece called I, Composer. I, Composer. And it was for string quartet and drum kit. And, I wrote the blurb, I had the idea. It was my second string quartet for King, a musical portrait of Martin Luther King, 45 minutes long. I wrote the whole piece, see, right, no commission. Wrote the whole piece. Started asking my friends to play excerpts of it, started doing it live, but then I started really researching and applying purposely for grants for that piece. And out of the probably 50 different funding sources I got one, but it was a great one. It was through Creative Capital. And it was a pretty, I would call a mid-sized grant, 5 figures. You can talk numbers, right?
Sure.
It was, I think, about $40,000 over 2 years. Which for me at that time was a lot of money.
Huge,
it still is, by the way. I like to think middle class, lower middle class, Let's not go all Kardashian. When $5,000 is a lot of money, and it is, right, you just scale that. $5,000 to certain people in parts of this world is a lot of money. And we shouldn't lose sight of that.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So, I got lucky. Somebody saw something in the piece. At the same time, I was very proactive. I wrote the piece. I had great recordings, not MIDI scores. I was performing it around town. It kind of, had its own reputation. This is well before it was happening online, by the way, well before. This is early 90s in New York City. Matter of fact, one of the first people to play that piece was a string quartet called Ethel. And one of their first performances, right. So
Another group of composers.
Another group, excellent, still good friends. So I think that's part of it. I think part of it is just, I call it going to the office. I was getting up, I was writing this piece. It ended up being 45 minutes long. I did the score, I did the parts, I had people play it. Then I started actively trying to find funding for it. Out of it, again, I remember it was about 50 different applications. One stuck, but that one, got it on its way.
One of the things that strikes me about the key to your success, or at least that is your mindset when you're going to New York, right? Because you approached it, you're a professional, right? You may not be making money, but you were going to the office. And you were also thinking of yourself as a business, right? You had capital, you had expenses, you were investing in yourself, you were, sort of curating that capital, deciding very carefully where to spend it.
Sure, wow.
Maybe not so much on the big, huge apartment, maybe on the...
when you say it that way, wow, I guess I was doing all those things. Thank you. My father's like, what are you doing with your life? You don't really know what work is. Work is, putting tiles on a roof, man. You're just sitting at a computer all day. When you say it that way, it gives me, I feel like I'm suddenly validated. No. Well, the truth is, I didn't think of it that way at that time. I had a few models. I call this modeling. My models at that time were Philip Glass, Meredith Monk, Bill T. Jones, Savion Glover, Bob Wilson, Bjork. And I can also tell you, that also meant Dunvegan, The House,
Right.
Bill T. Jones on his own dance company, Savior and Glover Productions, and One Little Indian Records. Ani DeFranco, Righteous Babe Records. So by that I mean, of course I knew I knew all their music and their artwork very well. Actually had the opportunity to work and record and do a lot of touring with Philip, but that was a later thing. But before I ever met Philip Glass or Meredith Monk, I knew their work, and they were important models for me. I knew their businesses.
Yeah.
The Philip Glass Ensemble, that was an important model for me. I started DBR on the Mission based on Philip Glass and the Philip Glass Ensemble, Steve Reich and musicians.
Right.
So the way they structured their careers to support their artwork and their artistic expressions was exactly how I was modeling my career. So I read in a book somewhere that Philip started applying for grants and started asking friends for money and performing in museums. So I literally started doing the same thing. I started asking friends and family for $10 or $20. I would perform in actually Studio Museum of Harlem, places like that.
So you were doing Kickstarter before there was Kickstarter?
In a way, yeah. Crowdfunding. Started with, every month asking my family and friends, modest, 20, 30, 40, 50 bucks. But I also put their names on the score. And even now I put stuff online, or I talk about, who helped me do this piece, and this, that's another story. But I had important models that were not just artistic models, they were, now that I think about it, administrative models. And that was key. It was really important to hear Philip Glass say, I was driving a cab, I was doing plumbing, I had a family, I was composing, and I felt like I was successful.
But I own my own production company, I own my own publisher.
Eventually. That was before all that, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but he always thought of himself as an independent, separate institution.
That's right, exactly.
And that's always been the case. He's never had like the big university gig.
That's exactly right.
Never had the big awards.
That's exactly right.
Been making it happen.
Yeah. And he does keep his copyrights, but you have to understand, not to the Hollywood music. Well, I've had this conversation that he can own, but that funds a lot of everything else that he does. That allows him to, Dunvegan keep his publishing.
Right.
Not every composer can do that. And things are changing. By the way, publishing, I'll say this, here's an idea. I think Amazon.com, man, when it comes to publishing. But that'll be another podcast.
All right.
I'll just throw that out there.
We'll do a bunch of these.
Yes.
So one of the other things I think about your work is that you are approaching like being in school as a kind of chance to build this team, build these partners, right?
I did then, yeah.
So much of the way, at least I was raised when I went to school of music, or even just high school, it was about shared challenges. It was about beating other people for the concerto competition.
Wow.
It was all about competition.
Wow.
Not about making friends.
Yeah.
But you seem to have thought really early on that this is my tribe. These are my people who are going to support me. These are not my competitors.
Yeah, I always felt that way. And I remember that culture too of competition, and I never really played into that. I was never interested in that. Because again, I come from the commercial world. Before Vanderbilt and University of Michigan, there was Two Live Crew and ghetto-style DJs. And you're competitive, but almost in a sports-like way. And it's funny, a lot of people in hip-hop and rap music and, African-American music, we were all athletes, really, or had an athletic sensibility, right? Even Prince, apparently a great basketball player, So by that I mean a healthy competition. You would practice with your teammates and you would go all out.
Yeah.
And then go and have some Kool-Aid or something together, whatever it is.
Something,
Yeah, but it wasn't like I want to kill you,
Right.
And even when you played other teams, those were sometimes your friends.
So it's about sportsmanship.
Exactly. So you wanted to beat them, and if you beat them fairly, it was over, and then you had your other personal life. And that's always how I approached even being at the University of Michigan. That, I was competing with other composers, absolutely. But I never had a sense that I had to outdo them. Matter of fact, a lot of the concerts that I organized were performances of their music, not mine. I conducted it, I produced the concert, I did all the advertising and marketing, and I think every one of those concerts I did, I never programmed my music, because I was more interested in conducting the pieces, promoting the pieces. I was actually kind of interested, could I actually get a full orchestra together? And that was the thing I was after. But what you're talking about, I think, is it's a choice that you make, But ultimately, I caution people about that, because there is enough competition out there, both healthy and unhealthy, for all of us. And I think you have to be really clear and careful about, when I think about a Nico Muhui or Thomas Addis or and Augusta Reed Thomas. And this is hard for me, admitting my ego, but I always try to say, well, I'm so glad, I'm so happy. Isn't that ... Because if you think about it, you know, Thomas Addis, for example, British composer, he's going to have a huge Lincoln Center, another, you know, series of presentations at Lincoln Center. This time, his music being used for dance. You know, if you look at it, you know, 80 dancers, 4 choreographers, 1 composer. White Light Festival, you know, New York City. That's huge. He's younger than I am. And he's had this tremendous success as a composer. So part of me says, isn't that great? Wow, White Light Festival in New York, 1 composer, all new music. 80, you know, they didn't even mention the orchestra, full orchestra. I'm assuming. All right, so that is great. That's great for him, that's great for the field, that's great for the industry. At the same time, though, I can be suspect of that and say, wow.
Why not me?
Why not me? Or why not other types of expression? The expressions of Puerto Rican composers, Native Americans, Black, East Indian. You know, the more we see one type of expression, that's wonderful, but it's also dangerous. So I can also, in my own way, you can do this on Facebook, I can politely suggest to the woman, and she's an important woman, who is running the White Light Festival, that is great for Thomas Addis and that type of musical expression. But man, wouldn't it be great if next year you did the same kind of investment in Gabriella Frank? Gabriella Lena Frank, right? I mean,
Another Michigan grad.
That's a Michigan grad, very important composer who is doing, whose music represents Guatemala and a lot of other places. But you can hold these types of, a little bit off topic, but I think what I'm getting at is this notion of you can celebrate and sincerely be happy for someone in your field for their success, and you can also challenge it, I think, in a healthy way. The more you get out of the way, the more it's less about your direct ego and this notion of we all should rise together. I think you're just going to have a better life, and I think you're going to find more success. Yeah. I think in some ways, you know, the industry needs stars and that sensibility, but it also needs humility. Yeah.
So there's a lot of places for a lot of different kinds of musicians.
Absolutely. And if I was a student here, if I were to go back, that's the one thing I got right, was that I think I collaborated in a very healthy way, in a way that promoted my own work, my own interests, but also my own values and morality. And we can say the same thing about our current dean. I mean, we were here together, and there was always that sense of, what can we do, not just for ourselves, but for the industry, for the field.
So you're performing other people's work, you're cheering your colleagues on.
That's exactly right.
How, when the opportunity doesn't come your way, how do you keep going to the office? How do you
drink? Just kidding.
Orange juice.
No, drink orange juice. No. How do you replenish the well?
Yes.
Well, you know, it's again, it's that mundane into magic. You know, I think you have to be able to constantly inspire yourself. I go to a lot of movies, I go to see a lot of work, but I also take myself out of there, you know. Yeah, go to church, go to temple, go to a Muslim mosque, go to a place of worship that's not your own, go to a soup kitchen, you know, go to a hospital. On this campus, there's so many opportunities, I think, now that I didn't have, in terms of music therapy, but I think not outreach, because that's a very dated term, by the way, but I think reaching out into the community to think about what I call is, we are victims of privilege, right? To be an artist, actually, in this country, you are a victim of privilege. So I understand, sometimes it just hurts. You don't get this. You wanted it and it didn't happen. This happened, your teacher said this opportunity, of course, happens to me all the time. Jealousy, ooh. I have struggled with jealousy. I know what I'm saying now. It sounds all nice. But I have struggled with jealousy. And then I have to find my own, I take full responsibility towards bucking myself up and making myself feel good again and whole again. Sometimes it's through watching just that great movie, reading that great book. But sometimes it's, you know, going to a homeless shelter. Really, you can do this and say, hey, what do you need me to do for a couple hours? You don't have to tell anybody. It has been transformative when I've done it. You know, my father was a chemist. My mother was a nurse. She's retired. I think if you're open to life experiences and a true nature of being empathetic, you know, I lost my father on April 22nd, 2013 at 1:07 p.m. And you know, I look at it this way. You know, you can talk about bowling. You can read it, you can watch a video, you can hold a bowling ball in your hands, but until you've actually bowled a game, you really don't know what you're talking about. And I didn't really understand what it is to lose a parent until I lost my own father. And now I can carry that, and I can talk about it, and I can remind people if they have or haven't lost their parent yet, that, man, you know, there's so much that the world needs from you, you know, and that the world expects from you, and that your artistic expression is so necessary, if only to one other person than yourself, you know. So I find that those things are really important as artists, that we can both provide and empathize, that we can both be a performer but also be an audience member. And that, yeah, when depression comes, that's kind of severe, right? That when depression comes, that you can actually do what we always say, that the arts can help us survive.
But reaching outside of yourself to larger humanity.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, that's a great message, especially as students, you know, look at the holiday breaks. There's always opportunities to volunteer.
Absolutely.
People in need who,
Absolutely.
you know, these moments of family, and maybe people in our communities don't have those
Absolutely.
advantages, or those connections. And then, you know, maybe if they're applying for a summer festival, they don't get that placement they're hoping for. Maybe that's the chance to volunteer for Habitat for Humanity or do something else that actually can deepen themselves as artists in a way that may even be more profound than that few extra tours through Beethoven 5.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I was in New York when 9/11 happened, and I remember that day, it was just, you know, kind of in a coma almost, in a trance. The next day, I actually played a dance class, long story. That night, I found myself in a very kind of almost abandoned New York City Times Square subway station. I took on my fiddle, I started to play. And I remember this German woman and her daughter. I know she was German because she kept talking to her daughter in German. And she started crying and crying when I was finished. I kept playing variations on the Star Spangled Banner, really slow. I finished, it was, you know, I remember it was hot. And she hugged me, we were both sweating, and she kissed me, really held me close for a few seconds, and she was gone. So I don't think I've ever talked about this publicly. I remember her so vividly, and I remember when she did that to me, I remember thinking, okay, you know, at least once a year, I'm gonna go somewhere in the New York City subway station, you know, take out my fiddle and just start playing. I remember I earned a lot of money that day on 9/11. I gave it all away, and it was, you know, the right thing to do. But I still do that, and it's a completely selfish thing. Every now and then, I just take out my fiddle. Sometimes it's 2 o'clock in the morning, whatever it is, and I just play. And I can assure you, any musician in the University of Michigan is going to garner an audience. Forget about that whole Josh Bell, Washington train station thing. I can tell you he was just in the wrong place, because if you're in the middle of that station where he should have been, he would have had hundreds of people. And not because it was Josh Bell, because it was beautiful playing. But you know, those who know the experiment we're talking about. But I do that. I do that every chance I get. I do that when I go back home to Margate, Florida, which has about 40,000 people. You know, I'll find myself downtown, I take out my fiddle, and you know, these days, inevitably somebody shoots you. An interesting way to use the word. As a black man in this country, I enjoy being shot sometimes, right? This is a poetic. That when they're shooting me with their phones, I'd like to think that, what happens to that artifact? You know, does it go home? Do they show it to somebody? So it's the easiest thing to do, to just take your artistry and give it away. Give it away. Why even hesitate? You know, maybe tonight in Ann Arbor, when everyone's asleep. All right.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. Thrilled to have you here.
Thank you.
You'll be here for 4
Yes.
events.
Yes. Looking forward.
Tonight.
Yes.
All right. Thanks so much.